The air in the house was thick with the scent of bleach, lilies, and the faint, acrid smoke of extinguished candles. It wasn't just a smell, it was a presence, heavy and unyielding, coating everything like a film of cold air. It seeped into the faded floral curtains, the cracks between the oak floorboards, the very bones of the walls. For 10 years I had lived in this house, not as a wife or a mother in the way most people imagine, but as a caretaker, a shadow, moving through endless nights to tend to a woman who was no longer herself. Robin's mother, Eleanor, had been bedridden since a stroke stole her legs, her voice, and most of her memories. And I, Linda, had become her hands, her eyes, her keeper. 10 years. The number felt like a stone in my chest, heavy and unmovable. I could still remember the first night I took on her care. Robin had stood in the doorway of her bedroom, his shoulders slumped, his eyes avoiding mine. "You're better at this than I am," he'd said, his voice low, almost apologetic. "She needs someone steady, someone like you." I didn't argue. I didn't know how to say no to duty, to family, to the man I'd promised to stand beside, so I nodded. And that nod became a decade of my life. Every morning at 5 a.m., I woke to the soft beep of the alarm clock, its sound a quiet command. I'd shuffle to the kitchen, the linoleum cold against my bare feet, and start the ritual. Puring her food, soft vegetables, mashed potatoes, anything her weakened throat could handle. I'd carry the tray to her room, where the air was always stale no matter how often I opened the window. Eleanor's eyes, cloudy and distant, would follow me as I adjusted her pillows, spooned the food into her mouth, and wiped the dribble from her chin. She couldn't speak, but sometimes her fingers would twitch, brushing against my hand, and I'd wonder if she was trying to say thank you or begging me to let her go. The days blurred into nights. I never slept through the night, not once. Every few hours I'd wake to turn her to prevent the bed sores that crept up despite my efforts. I'd change her diapers, massage her legs to keep the blood flowing, apply ointments that stung my hands with their chemical bite. At 2 a.m., when the house was silent except for the creak of the floorboards under my weight, I'd sit by her bedside, staring at the moonlight slicing through the window. I'd ask myself, how many decades does a person get? They say an iron rod can be ground into a needle with enough time. But my heart? My heart had grown layers of calluses, thick and unfeeling, from the endless grind of care, from Robin's sharp words, from the colder silences that followed. Robin was rarely there. He'd leave for work trips, claiming deadlines and deals that couldn't wait. When he was home, he'd find excuses, poker nights, drinks with friends, or just sitting in the garage, tinkering with tools that never seemed to fix anything. "This house is so dark," he'd mutter, his voice edged with blame. "You make it feel like a hospital." I'd bite my tongue, swallowing the retort that it was a hospital, that I was the nurse, the cleaner, the cook, all for a woman who wasn't even my own mother. I told myself he was grieving in his own way, that he'd see my effort one day, that he'd feel it in his heart, even if he never said it. Kathy, our daughter, was my only light in those years. She was in college then, studying journalism in San Francisco, but she'd call every week, her voice bright and warm through the phone. "Mom, you okay?" she'd ask, and I'd force a smile into my words. "I'm fine, honey, just tired." She'd seen it all growing up. The late nights, the way I'd flinch when Robin raised his voice, the way I'd stopped painting, stopped reading, stopped doing anything that wasn't tied to survival, but she was powerless to change it, and I never wanted her to feel that burden. The day of Eleanor's funeral was a blur of black dresses, murmured condolences, and the cloying scent of lilies. Relatives I hadn't seen in years filled the house, their voices a low hum of pity and platitudes. "You were so good to her, Linda," they'd say, squeezing my hand. "A saint, really." I nodded, my face a mask of calm, but inside I felt like a rubber band stretched too thin, ready to snap. The funeral had drained me. Not just the logistics, but the weight of 10 years finally coming to an end. I thought, it's over now, maybe I can breathe again. Maybe Robin and I can find some warmth. even if it's just quiet companionship. Robin played the part of the grieving son perfectly. He wailed at the graveside, his chest heaving, tears streaming down his face. The relatives clung to him, whispering, "Be strong, Robin. Your mother wouldn't want this." To them, he was a devoted son, broken by loss. But I saw it, the flicker in his red, puffy eyes. It wasn't sorrow. It was relief, a quiet, guilty freedom, the look of a man who'd just set down a burden he'd never truly carried. They called him a good son. Only I knew how little time he'd spent by her side, how he'd left me to bear the weight alone. That night, after the last relatives left, the house fell into an eerie stillness. Kathy sat beside me on the couch, her hand warm against my cold one. "Mom," she said softly, "you don't look so good. Why don't you lie down?" I patted her hand, forcing a smile. "I'm fine, honey, just tired." But in my mind, a faint hope flickered. She's gone now, the weight I've carried for 10 years. It's gone, isn't it? I imagined a future where I could sleep through the night, where Robin and I might sit together, not in passion but in peace, growing old hand in hand. Dinner was takeout, ordered by Kathy. The three of us sat at the dining table, but the air was thick, the silence louder than any conversation. Robin barely touched his food, his fork hovering over a plate of cold appetizers. He lit a cigarette, the smoke curling around his face, masking his expression. It felt like a wall had formed between us, separating us into two different worlds. He tapped his finger on the table, tap, 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 like he was rehearsing something in his mind. And then, out of nowhere, he spoke. His voice was too calm, too controlled, like he'd practiced flattening the emotion out of it. "Linda, I think we should get a divorce." The words hit me like a swarm of bees, buzzing so loudly my mind went blank. I stared at him, waiting for a smirk, a hint that this was some cruel joke. But his eyes were fixed on the air vent above the window, avoiding mine. He wasn't joking. He was dead serious. He paused, then added as if his reasoning needed padding. "What I mean is, the truth is, whatever we had, it's been gone for a long time. We only stayed together because of my mum. Now that she's gone, there's no reason to keep holding each other back." Holding each other back. The words sliced through me, sharp and cold. 10 years of sacrifice. Cooking, feeding, bathing, changing diapers at 2 a.m., and he reduced it to nothing. I was just a placeholder, free labor for his mother's care, and now that the job was done, I was disposable. My heart didn't break. It froze, a lake of ice cracking under the weight of his betrayal. Kathy slammed her chopsticks down, her eyes blazing. "Dad, how could you say that? Mom took care of Grandma for 10 years. Do you have any idea what she went through? And now, right after the funeral, you want a divorce? Do you even have a conscience?" Robin flinched, his face twitching with irritation. "Stay out of grown-up matters, Kathy. You don't understand." But Kathy didn't back down. "Don't understand. I grew up in this house. I watched Mom hold it together, getting up at night to give meds, changing sheets, feeding your mother. And you? Where were you? Now you say there's no love? Where was that honesty 10 years ago?" His face reddened, his voice rising. "This is between your mother and me. Stay out of it." I watched them argue, and something inside me shifted. The ice in my chest began to splinter, revealing dark, still water beneath. I was done. I took a deep breath, swallowing the fury and humiliation clawing at my throat. My voice came out cold, eerily calm. "Fine. I agree to the divorce." Robin blinked, caught off guard. He'd expected me to beg, to crumble, to be the quiet, hesitant Linda he'd always known. But I wasn't that woman anymore. His mouth opened, then closed. His rehearsed justification stuck in his throat. Calculation crept into his eyes. She's giving in too easily. She must be desperate. She'll be easy to squeeze in the settlement. He cleared his throat, adopting a measured tone. Well, if you feel the same way, let's keep this simple. The house belonged to my parents originally. We renovated it, but the deed should be mine. There's not much in the account. We spent most of it over the years. I'll take 2/3, you take 1/3. I'll keep the car. I need it for work. And I can throw in some support, 50,000. Sound fair? 50,000. As if a decade of my life could be bought off like a used car. I stared at his smug, calculating face, and whatever lingering affection I had evaporated. Not anger, not pain, disgust. I stood, walked to the bedroom, and pulled out my ledger from the nightstand drawer, along with years of receipts, invoices, and a photocopy of the house deed. Back at the table, I dropped them in front of him with a thud. You think I'm stupid, don't you? My voice was quiet, but sharp enough to cut glass. This house is joint marital property. The title has both our names. If you want to argue it's your parents', you'll need a will or legal proof. For 10 years, I tracked every expense. Your mother's medical bills, nursing costs, Kathy's tuition, the mortgage, utilities. You know how much of your paycheck went where and who covered the rest. I'm not stopping you from divorcing me. But the house? We sell it and split the profits, or you buy me out at market value. Bank accounts, investments, retirement funds, everything gets divided by law. And for the 10 years I cared for your mother with no pay, no sleep, no life, I'll seek fair compensation for that too. I locked eyes with him, steady and firm. You don't have to agree. That's what court is for. For the first time, I saw panic flicker in his eyes. He'd thought I couldn't survive without him. He was wrong. I'd stayed out of duty, but that duty was gone. What I wanted now was justice, and no one was walking away with what I'd earned. The ink on the divorce papers was barely dry when Robin started his campaign. I'd expected silence, maybe a cold retreat into his newfound freedom. But he was never one for quiet exits. Instead, he turned to the only weapon he'd ever mastered, guilt. 2 days after we signed the papers, I heard from Jane, his sister, who showed up at my doorstep with grocery bags and a rehearsed smile. "Linda," she said, her voice soft as if coaxing a wounded animal. Robin's struggling. "He didn't mean it to come out so harsh. You two have decades together. Don't throw that away over one bad moment." I stood in the doorway of the house I was preparing to leave, the air still heavy with the scent of lilies and disinfectant. My hands tightened around the edge of the counter, but my voice stayed steady. "Jane, where was Robin when I was up at 2 a.m. changing your mother's diapers? Where were you?" Her smile faltered, and I pressed on, each word sharpened by a decade of resentment. He wants to talk about decades now. He didn't care about them when he told me I was holding him back. I'm done being anyone's nursemaid. Jane left, bags still in hand, her face a mix of shock and guilt. But Robin wasn't done. He called Kathy next, his voice trembling with that practiced, wounded tone he'd always used to bend people to his will. "I know I messed up," he told her, "but your mom's being so cold. Can't you talk to her?" For me, Kathy, bless her heart, didn't waver. "Dad," she said, her voice firm, "Mom gave you 10 years of her life. You don't get to ask for more now." I heard about it later when she came to help me pack, her eyes blazing with quiet fury. "He thought I'd take his side," she said, shaking her head. "He's wrong." I didn't budge. Not when Jane sent a follow-up text, not when Robin left voicemails claiming he just wanted to talk. I'd spent 10 years bending, compromising, swallowing my own needs for a man who saw me as a tool. That Linda was gone, buried alongside Eleanor's memory. I wasn't angry anymore, just resolute. My heart, once raw and calloused, had hardened into something unbreakable. I wasn't fighting for Robin's approval or his family's pity. I was fighting for me. Robin didn't stop at Jane and Kathy. He reached out to distant cousins, old family friends, even the pastor at his church, spinning a tale of a marriage undone by my unforgiving heart. He painted himself as a man broken by loss, abandoned by a wife who'd turned cold. "I just need her to see reason," he'd say, his voice heavy with feigned remorse. I got wind of it through a neighbor who'd heard the story at a church potluck. "Linda, he's telling everyone you walked out without a word," she said, her brow furrowed. I just smiled, thin and sharp. Let him talk. The truth doesn't need an audience. Each attempt to sway others only hardened my resolve. I wasn't the naive woman who'd nodded and taken on his mother's care a decade ago. I'd learned to see through his tactics, to recognize the way he'd twist words to make himself the victim. When Kathy told me about his latest call, how he'd cried, claiming he was lost without Mom, I felt nothing but a cold clarity. "He's not lost," I told her. "He's just out of excuses." She nodded, her jaw tight, and in that moment, I knew she saw him for what he was. My daughter, my fierce, thoughtful girl, was my anchor, and together, we drew a line no one could cross. The day I moved out, the house felt like a husk, its walls echoing with memories I no longer wanted. I took only what was mine, my clothes, my mother's heirloom jewelry, and the ledger that had become my shield. Kathy drove me to my new home, a small one-bedroom apartment in a quiet South Bay neighborhood, 10 minutes from her office in San Francisco. The building was old, its yellowed kitchen tiles and chipped balcony railing showing its age, but it faced south, and sunlight poured in like a promise. I stood in the empty living room, the hardwood floor creaking under my feet, and felt something I hadn't in years. Possibility. I hired a handyman to repaint the walls in a warm beige, hung soft cotton curtains with delicate pinstripes, and furnished the place with just the essentials: a small bed, a writing desk, a dining table for two, and a cozy recliner. Every choice was mine, every detail a rebellion against the life I'd left behind. On moving day, Kathy arrived with 2 of her co-workers, their laughter filling the space as they carried boxes and teased me about my worn pots and pans. "Mom, your kitchen's got serious lived-in vibes," Kathy said, grinning. I laughed, a real laugh, and for the first time in a decade, my chest didn't feel like it was caving in. That evening, after her friends left, Kathy helped me unpack. She hung my clothes in the closet while I placed my mother's silver necklace and tiny ring in the vanity drawer. Out of nowhere, she wrapped her arms around me from behind, resting her head on my shoulder. "Mom," she whispered, "don't worry. Everything's going to be okay." I froze, then smiled, patting her arm. "I know," I said. "I really do." In that moment, standing in my sunlit apartment, I felt it. Freedom. Not the loud, reckless kind, but the quiet, steady kind that comes from knowing no one else's needs would ever again dictate my days. The apartment became my sanctuary. Mornings I'd wake to the soft hum of the neighborhood, kids on bikes, dogs barking, the distant clatter of a garbage truck. I'd brew chamomile tea, sit on my tiny balcony in a folding chair, and watch the world unfold below. The sunlight warmed my skin, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was racing against a clock. I started small rituals, watering a potted rosemary plant on the balcony, reading a novel before bed, listening to jazz on a second-hand radio I'd bought at a flea market. Each act was a reclamation, a stitch in the fabric of a life I was sewing for myself. I found a job at a community library near Kathy's office thanks to her recommendation. It was part-time, simple work, reshelving books, logging check-ins and returns, helping kids find their next favorite story. The library was a haven, its air scented with paper and worn book covers, its windows overlooking a lawn of neatly trimmed shrubs. My first day, I ironed my shirt 3 times, arrived 30 minutes early, and paced outside like a nervous schoolgirl. The head librarian, Patricia, welcomed me with a warm smile. "People who love books usually know how to keep life in good order," she said, patting my shoulder. I smiled, and something soft unfurled inside me. The work was peaceful, a balm after years of chaos. I'd spend hours organizing shelves, my fingers brushing against spines worn by countless hands. Sometimes I'd catch myself humming, a habit I'd forgotten I had. The regulars started calling me Miss Linda, and the kids would tug at my sleeve asking for books about dragons or spaceships. I'd kneel beside them, pointing to a colorful cover, and their eyes would light up. A reminder that joy could be so simple. One afternoon, a little girl with pigtails handed me a crumpled drawing of a librarian with a crown. "That's you, Miss Linda," she said, beaming. I tucked it into my desk drawer, a small treasure I'd carry in my heart. Outside work, I began to reclaim the pieces of myself I'd buried. I enrolled in a watercolor class at the community center, joining a group of women my age gathered around easels, practicing shading and color blending. My first attempts were clumsy, apples that looked like soggy tomatoes. But week by week, my lines grew stronger, my colors richer. I'd lose myself in the soft swish of the brush, the way blue bled into yellow, creating something new. There was something sacred about it, creating something just for me. I'd bring my paintings home, pinning them to the fridge, each one a marker of progress, a proof that I could still grow. I also joined a morning dance group in the park, a Zumba and Latin cardio team led by a woman named Sharon, whose bright workout gear and infectious grin could light up a city block. I was stiff at first, always a beat behind, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. But Sharon pulled me aside one day. "Linda, loosen up. Nobody cares if you're on beat. Just dance for fun." And slowly I did. I let go, my body remembering how to move, my laughter mingling with the group. One morning, as we danced to a pulsing salsa beat, Sharon shouted, "Linda, you've got it!" and the women cheered. I laughed, sweat on my brow, and felt lighter than I had in years, as if I'd shaken off a decade of weariness. I reconnected with old friends, women I'd drifted from during the years of caregiving. We started a group text, chatting about grocery deals, noisy neighbors, and Zumba mishaps. On weekends, we'd meet at local cafes, sharing lattes and browsing sale racks at strip malls. We'd laugh until our eyes teared up, reminiscing about sneaking into movie theaters as teens. They saw me not as Robin's wife or Eleanor's nurse, but as Linda. Vibrant, alive, whole. One friend, Maria, squeezed my hand one day and said, "You're glowing, Linda. Like you've finally come back to yourself." I smiled, knowing she was right. My days found a rhythm, a pulse of anticipation. I'd wake early, brew coffee, and walk to the library, the morning air crisp against my skin. I'd spend afternoons painting or dancing, evenings reading or calling Kathy to catch up. I bought clothes that flattered me, not just whatever was practical. I invested in skincare, learning to care for my body, not out of duty, but out of love. When Kathy and I went shopping, she'd hand me dresses over the changing room door, saying, "Mom, this one's perfect, elegant, and classy." We'd laugh, and sometimes strangers would mistake us for sisters, a compliment that made me glow not from vanity, but from joy. Meanwhile, Robin's world was unraveling. Without me, the house he'd fought to keep became a tomb. The couch was buried under dirty clothes, fishing vests, and empty beer cans. The sink overflowed with greasy takeout containers, the air thick with a rank, sour stench. He lived off burgers and frozen pizza, washing them down with sugary sodas that churned his stomach. He'd sit for hours staring at a blank TV screen, the remote out of reach, too tired to care. The silence he'd once craved now pressed against him, a weight he couldn't escape. Less than 2 weeks after I left, his body rebelled. A sharp pain seized his gut one night, doubling him over in bed, cold sweat soaking his sheets. He reached for his meds, but his trembling hand knocked over a glass, shattering it on the floor. Alone, curled up in the dark, he fumbled for his phone and called 911. The hospital was a cold, humming void. He lay on a cot under fluorescent lights, watching other patients surrounded by spouses, children, friends. No one came for him. No one held his hand or asked how he was feeling. The paramedics had brought him in, but after that he was just another chart, another name on a clipboard. As he stared at the ceiling, the truth crept in. The order, the warmth, the small comforts he'd taken for granted. They'd never been effortless. They were me, every day, every moment, holding up a life he'd never bothered to appreciate. He thought of the house, now a mess of his own making, and the life he'd imagined, free, unburdened, full of possibility. It was a lie. He'd traded a home for a prison, and the bars were his own. He tried to fill the void. He called old buddies for drinks, their laughter loud but hollow. He posted fishing photos on social media, captioned, "Finally doing what I love." But the likes dwindled and the comments stopped. He joined dating apps, crafting profiles that sold him as a stable, independent man seeking a companion. But the women he met saw through him. They heard the bitterness in his voice, the way he talked only about himself, the way he criticized their choices or complained about prices. One date ended with him blocked, another with a polite, "You seem nice, but we're not a match." Each rejection carved deeper, leaving him to drink alone, the cheap bourbon burning his throat. His health deteriorated. The gut pain returned, sharper now, and his herniated disc flared, a reminder of the nights I'd stayed up applying heat packs, rubbing ointments, helping him stretch. Now, he couldn't bend to tie his shoes without collapsing in pain. One night, he fell to the floor, drenched in sweat, and lay there for hours, the house silent except for his ragged breaths. He thought of calling me, of begging, but the memory of my voice, cold, final, unyielding, stopped him. He tried his buddies instead, but their phones went to voicemail, their texts unanswered. The poker table had emptied out. Robin's attempts to manipulate continued. He called Kathy again, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "I'm not doing so good, kiddo," he said. "Just talk to your mom. Tell her I'm sorry." Kathy's response was a wall, firm and unmoving. "Dad, she's done enough. Let her be." He tried Jane, spinning a tale of loneliness and regret, but even she was growing weary. "Robin, you made your choice," she said, her voice tinged with disappointment. He even reached out to the church, hoping the congregation's sympathy might pressure me, but the pastor's response was gentle but firm. "Linda's moved on. Maybe it's time you do too." Each rejection was a nail in the coffin of his fantasy. He'd thought he could guilt me back, that I'd crumble under the weight of family ties or Kathy's pleas. But I was no longer the woman who'd bent to his will. I'd built a life that didn't include him, and every attempt to pull me back only pushed me further away. When Kathy told me about his latest call, I shook my head. "He thinks he can rewrite the past," I said, "but I'm not a page he can edit." My life, meanwhile, was blooming. The library became more than a job. It was a community. Patricia invited me to book club, where I sat with other women, sipping tea and debating novels. I found myself speaking up, my voice steady, my opinions valued. The kids at the library started bringing me small gifts, a sticker, a folded paper crane, and I'd display them on my desk, a gallery of kindness. One day, a regular and older man named Henry handed me a jar of homemade jam. "Miss Linda, you make this place feel like home," he said. I smiled, my heart full, and realized I was building something new, something mine. My watercolor class became a weekly ritual. I'd sit at my easel, the world fading as I mixed colors, the brush an extension of my hand. My paintings grew bolder, landscapes with vibrant skies, still lifes with delicate shadows. One day, my teacher, a kind woman named Ellen, held up my painting of a sunset. "Linda, this has soul," she said. The class clapped, and I felt a warmth spread through me, a pride I hadn't known in years. I started framing my best pieces, hanging them in my apartment, each one a testament to the woman I was becoming. The dance group was my joy. Sharon's energy was contagious, and the women welcomed me like family. We'd dance at dawn, the park alive with music and laughter. I'd stumble through steps, but their cheers kept me going. One morning, as we swayed to a merengue beat, Sharon grabbed my hand and spun me. "Linda, you're a natural," she shouted. I laughed, breathless, and for a moment I was young again, unburdened, alive. After class, we'd sit on the grass, sharing water and stories, and I'd marvel at how easily I fit in, how I'd found my people. I started caring for myself in ways I'd never thought possible. I bought a soft blue dress that hugged my figure, a pair of earrings that caught the light. I learned to apply makeup, not much, just a touch of lipstick and mascara, enough to feel polished. My skin, once dull from exhaustion, began to glow, thanks to a skincare routine I'd pieced together from magazine tips. Kathy noticed it first. "Mom, you look like you're in your 40s, she said, grinning. I laughed, but I believed it. The woman in the mirror wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. Robin's life, by contrast, was a slow-motion collapse. His finances crumbled as he burned through his share of the house sale on poker games and bad investments. He'd sit at the kitchen table, surrounded by unopened bills, his phone buzzing with debt collector calls. The house, once a home, was now a mess of neglect. Laundry left soaking for days, trash bags piling up in the garage. He stopped cooking, surviving on instant noodles and cheap beer, his body weakening with every meal. His health took another hit when a cold turned into a fever that kept him bedridden for days. No one brought soup or checked on him. He'd lie on the couch, too weak to turn on the light, the emptiness in his chest heavier than the fever. When his herniated disc flared again, the pain was unbearable. He'd collapse trying to stand, his hands shaking as he reached for painkillers that barely helped. One night he lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling, and realized he couldn't do this alone, but there was no one left. He thought of me, not with love, but with a desperate clarity. He remembered the nights I'd stayed up, the way I'd kept the house running, the way I'd made his life work. He'd taken it all for granted, assuming it was his right, his due. Now, alone in a house that smelled of decay, he saw the truth. I hadn't been holding him back. I'd been holding him up. And when I walked away, his world had collapsed under its own weight. He tried one last time to reach me, leaving a voicemail that I deleted without listening. "Linda, I'm sorry," he'd said, his voice cracked and hollow. "I didn't know." But I did. I'd known for years, and I'd carried that knowledge through a decade of sacrifice. Now, I was free, and no amount of guilt or regret could pull me back. I stood on my balcony, the evening breeze stirring my hair, and looked out at the world I'd built. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was enough. The sunlight in my apartment was different now. It wasn't just light, it was a presence, warm and golden, spilling across the hardwood floor like an invitation to live. I'd wake each morning to its soft glow, the world outside my window alive with the hum of a South Bay neighborhood, kids on bikes, dogs barking, the distant clatter of a delivery truck. My tiny balcony, with its chipped railing and potted rosemary, became my sanctuary. I'd sit there with a mug of chamomile tea, watching the street below, and feel something I hadn't known in years. Peace. Not the fragile kind that comes from a quiet house, but the steady, unshakable kind that grows when you've finally claimed your life as your own. The divorce had severed the chains of my past, and, in their place, I was building something new. My one-bedroom apartment, modest as it was a canvas for my rebirth. The walls, painted a warm beige, held no echoes of bleach or extinguished candles. The soft cotton curtains I'd hung, with their delicate pinstripes, fluttered in the breeze, catching the light in a way that made the room feel alive. I'd furnished it sparingly, a small bed with crisp white sheets, a writing desk where I'd sketch or read, a dining table for two, and a cozy recliner where I'd curl up with a novel. Every choice was deliberate, every item a declaration that this space, this life, was mine. My days found a rhythm, a pulse of anticipation that carried me forward. I'd walk to the community library where I worked part-time, the morning air crisp against my skin, the scent of eucalyptus lingering from nearby trees. The library was more than a job. It was a haven, its air thick with the comforting smell of paper and worn book covers. I'd spend hours reshelving books, my fingers brushing against spines that held stories of adventure, love, and triumph. The regulars called me Miss Linda, and the kids would tug at my sleeve asking for tales of dragons or spaceships. I'd kneel beside them, pointing to a colorful cover, and watch their eyes light up. A reminder that joy could be so simple. Patricia, the head librarian, became a friend. She invited me to book club, where I sat with a circle of women, sipping tea and debating novels. At first I was quiet, my voice rusty from years of silence, but they listened when I spoke, nodding as I shared my thoughts on a character's courage or a story's hope. I found myself speaking up more, my opinions valued, my presence welcomed. One evening, after a lively discussion of The Secret Garden, Patricia squeezed my arm. "Linda, you've got a way of seeing the heart of things," she said. I smiled, my chest warm, and realized I was no longer invisible. The library wasn't just a workplace. It was a community. Older patrons brought me small gifts, a jar of homemade jam, a knitted bookmark saying my book recommendations were better than any prescription. A little girl with pigtails once handed me a crumpled drawing of a librarian with a crown. "That's you, Miss Linda," she said, beaming. I tucked it into my desk drawer, a treasure I'd carry in my heart. These moments, small as they were bricks in the foundation of a life I was building, one where I was seen, valued, and whole. Outside work, I poured myself into rediscovery. I had enrolled in a watercolor class at the community center, joining a group of women my age gathered around easels, their chatter a soft hum of encouragement. My first attempts were clumsy apples that looked like soggy tomatoes, skies that bled into muddy grays. But I didn't care. The act of painting, the soft swish of the brush, was a meditation, a way to quiet the echoes of the past. Week by week, my lines grew stronger, my colors richer. I'd lose myself in the process, mixing blues and yellows, watching them blend into something new. My teacher, Ellen, held up one of my paintings, a sunset with fiery oranges and deep purples, and said, "Linda, this has soul." The class clapped, and I felt a pride I hadn't known in years, a spark that said I could still create, still grow. I framed my best pieces, hanging them in my apartment. Each one was a marker of progress, a proof that I was more than the woman who'd spent a decade as a caretaker. I'd stand in front of them sometimes, a glass of wine in hand, and marvel at the woman I was becoming. She wasn't perfect, but she was mine, and that was enough. I also joined a morning dance group in the park, a Zumba and Latin cardio team led by Sharon, a woman whose bright workout gear and infectious grin could power a city block. I was stiff at first, my body unaccustomed to moving for joy, my cheeks burning as I stumbled through steps. But Sharon saw me hiding in the back and pulled me aside. "Linda, loosen up," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Nobody cares if you're on beat, just dance for fun." Her words unlocked something in me. I started to let go, my hips swaying to salsa beats, my laughter mingling with the group's. One morning, as we danced to a pulsing merengue, Sharon grabbed my hand and spun me. "Linda, you're a natural," she shouted. The women cheered and I laughed breathless, my heart soaring. For a moment, I was young again, unburdened, alive. The dance group became my family. After class, we'd sit on the grass, sharing water and stories. They'd tease me about my newfound energy, saying I was the group's secret weapon. Sharon once joked, "Linda, if we ever do a show, you're co-captain." I shook my head, laughing, but the warmth of their acceptance stayed with me. These women saw me not as Robin's wife or Eleanor's nurse, but as Linda, vibrant, whole enough. I reconnected with old friends, women I'd drifted from during the years of caregiving. Maria, who'd moved to Santa Clara, and June, who volunteered at a local shelter, welcomed me back like no time had passed. We started a group text, chatting about grocery deals, noisy neighbors, and Zumba mishaps. On weekends, we'd meet at cafes, sharing lattes and browsing sale racks at strip malls. We'd laugh until our eyes teared up, reminiscing about sneaking into movie theaters as teens, or the time Maria got stuck in a too-tight dress at a department store. They saw the change in me, the way my shoulders no longer slumped, the way my smile reached my eyes. "Linda, you're glowing," June said one day, squeezing my hand. "Like you finally come home to yourself." I nodded, knowing she was right. My confidence grew, not in a loud, showy way, but in the quiet choices I made for myself. I bought clothes that flattered me, a soft blue dress that hugged my figure, a pair of earrings that caught the light. I invested in skincare, learning to care for my body not out of duty but out of love. I'd stand in front of the mirror applying a touch of lipstick and see a woman who was no longer fading. Kathy noticed it first. "Mom, you look like you're in your 40s, she said, grinning. We'd go shopping in San Francisco, and she'd hand me dresses over the changing room door, saying, "This one's perfect, elegant, and classy." Sometimes strangers mistook us for sisters, and I'd laugh, not out of vanity, but because I believed it. The woman in the mirror was vibrant, alive, a far cry from the invisible housewife I'd been. Kathy was my anchor. She'd visit on weekends, bringing takeout or helping me rearrange the apartment. We'd sit on the balcony, sipping tea, and talk about her work, her dreams, the life she was building. One evening she looked at me, her eyes soft. "Mom, I'm proud of you," she said. "You're not just surviving, you're thriving." I squeezed her hand, my heart full. Her words were a mirror, reflecting the truth I was starting to see. I was enough. While I was building a life of light, Robin was sinking into darkness. His attempts to manipulate had failed, and the silence from Jane, Kathy, and the community was deafening. He'd thought he could guilt me back, that I'd crumble under the weight of family ties or public opinion. But I'd drawn a line, and no amount of tears or tales could cross it. Desperate, he tried a new tactic: begging. It started with a voicemail, his voice cracked and hollow. "Linda, I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know what I had. Can we just talk?" I deleted it without a second thought. Then came the texts, long paragraphs about our sweet years, how he dreamed of us cooking together in the old kitchen, how he'd been a fool. I didn't respond. He showed up at the library one day, disheveled, his jacket faded, his shoes cracked. "Linda, please," he said, his eyes red. "I'm not asking for much, just a chance." I stood behind the counter, my hands steady on a stack of books. "Robin, we're done," I said, my voice calm but absolute. "Legally, emotionally, completely. Your life is your own now, and so is mine." He opened his mouth, but no words came. For a moment, I saw the man I'd once loved, the one who'd smiled at me across a crowded room decades ago. But that man was gone, replaced by someone who'd used me and discarded. I turned away and he left, the door chime echoing in his wake. I'd set my boundaries and they were ironclad. I told Kathy, if he contacts me again, I'll get a protective order. She nodded, her jaw tight. "Mom, we guard your peace, together." Her words were a vow, and I knew she meant them. I wasn't just protecting myself. I was protecting the life I'd fought for, the woman I'd become. Robin, unable to break through, turned to his last resort: public shame. He took to social media, posting a photo of us from years ago, standing in the backyard of the old house, my arm around his shoulder, the sun glowing behind us. It was a calculated choice, a snapshot of happier times, meant to tug at heartstrings. His caption was a masterpiece of manipulation. 30 years of marriage, gone just like that. I wasn't perfect, but who is? Now, I'm alone, in pain, no family nearby. I'm not asking for money, just a chance to come home. The posts spread like wildfire, shared across Facebook groups, neighborhood forums, even the church's mailing list. Comments poured in, dripping with sympathy. "Heartbreaking," one wrote. "No wife should let her husband fall this far," another added. "Linda, do the decent thing, check on him." A few forwarded it to me directly, their messages gentle but pointed. "Your ex seems in a bad place. Maybe just reach out." I wasn't angry. I wasn't anxious. I was tired. Tired of how easily people swallowed a sob story without questioning it. But I wasn't silent. I chose 2 platforms where the post was gaining traction and wrote a single public reply. Polite, but razor sharp. "Thank you for your concern. For context, Robin and I are legally divorced with assets divided by law. I cared for his bedridden mother for 10 years, often alone. He filed for divorce 5 days after her burial, stating I was no longer useful. I've never spoken ill of him. I only ask that the loudest voice not be the most dishonest. If you care for his well-being, consider bringing him meals or helping with medical costs. As for me, I won't look back." My words were a hammer shattering his narrative. The tide turned overnight. Comments flipped, the truth spreading faster than his lies. 10 years of care and he leaves her? That's not cold, that's clarity, one wrote. Another added, he didn't mention splitting the house money or his poker games. Funny, right? Screenshots surfaced, old group chats where Robin bragged about gambling, borrowed money for can't-miss investments. His carefully crafted image collapsed, and by the third day he'd deleted every post, every comment, and vanished from the groups. I didn't feel triumphant. This wasn't about winning. It was about laying down the weight of someone else's story. I'd spent too long justifying, explaining, absorbing blame for a man who'd never earned my protection. My silence wasn't absence. It was closure. Robin's life unraveled completely. The church, once a source of sympathy, became a place of averted eyes. His finances, already strained, flatlined after a failed investment. His share of the house sale gone in a month. His health deteriorated. His untreated back pain risking paralysis. Kathy stepped in, arranging a government-subsidized nursing facility, a dim place with small windows and the constant smell of disinfectant. She helped him move in, but I didn't go. He looked 10 years older, she told me, her voice quiet. I nodded, sipping my tea, and said nothing. His regret was his to carry, not mine. I, meanwhile, found peace. My days were full. Work at the library, painting, dancing, laughing with friends. I'd walk home under a sky streaked with pink, the air cool against my skin, and feel a quiet contentment. One evening, as I sat on my balcony, I wrote 4 goals in a notebook. Find meaningful work, reclaim my hobbies, reconnect with friends, and love myself. I was doing all 4, and the woman in the mirror was no longer a shadow. She was vibrant, strong, alive. Kathy visited one Saturday, and we drank tea on the balcony, the roses in my yard swaying in the breeze. I looked at her and asked, "When you were little, did you ever hate me?" She blinked, caught off guard, then shook her head. "No, I just didn't understand why you stayed quiet." I stared into my cup, then murmured, "I didn't understand either." Silence was all I knew. She squeezed my hand. "Mom, you were the light ahead of me." I smiled, a real smile, not because someone saw me, but because I finally saw myself. That night, I taped a note to my fridge. 65 is not the end. It's where the next act begins. I wasn't going back, not because I hated anyone, but because I deserved a future that was mine. A future without pain, without guilt, without the quiet martyrdom of someone else's needs. Just me and a life I'd set on fire for no one but myself.